One of the historic bright spots out of Tuesday's election is the fact for the first time in America's history, someone who's openly transgender will be a member of Congress, and young to boot. This is on the heels of the Republican Party leaning into the demonization of trans folks and spending hundreds of millions of dollars on anti-transgender ads this election cycle.
After decades of struggle, after thousands of us around the world begged to be heard, after our rights were ignored and rolled back as we struggled to fight for a place in the world, we finally have the first transgender woman in the United States Congress. The thing is, she's shit.
I will not use multi-stall women's restrooms in the Capitol. But again, that is my choice here.
Now, I sympathise with the Americans on this one. The first openly transgender MP in the UK was shit too. In fact, he was worse than shit. He was a Tory. But I haven't just come here to smear the first trans members of the major legislative bodies on both sides of the Atlantic without evidence. I have reasons for saying that Representative-elect Sarah McBride and Jamie Wallace MP, well, former MP, suck. And it's not because, as certain Republican Congress people might have you believe, because they're transgender.
I will stand in the brink and stand in the way of anyone on the radical left who thinks that it's okay for a penis to be in a women's locker room or a bathroom or a changing room. Hell no.
Hi, I'm Officer Tammy Cox, a proud member of the Bathroom Police.
In actuality, the fact that they're transgender is the one thing separating them from the rest of the corporate stooges in their respective parties. Their transgender nature might suggest that these two politicians are progressives. But the first openly trans British MP, Jamie Wallace, was one of the Boris Johnson-era Conservative intake from 2019. One with a boatload of scandals and sleaze, a horrible voting record, and someone who was happy to be an MP for a party that over and over again bragged about clamping down on trans rights, and then did clamp down on trans rights, only speaking out when it came out trans people would be excluded from any conversion therapy ban in Parliament. And if he hadn't been forcibly outed by blackmailers, which is how he found out we had a trans MP, I doubt he would even have gone that far. And the first openly trans member of the United States Congress, Sarah McBride? Well, despite having spent her early career vocally opposing trans bathroom bills, she's now rolling over on a bathroom bill in the Capitol itself. That won't just affect her, but all staff and all visitors. This is not just a personal attack, though it is a personal attack on her, but it's also an attack on the entire trans community. And she's already made it clear before she's even taken office that she'll just go along with whatever the Republicans want her to do, no matter how humiliating, and no matter how many other trans people might suffer for her spinelessness. At the first hurdle, she crumbled. Or I suppose she should be falling in that metaphor. However the metaphor should go, trans people as a whole will ultimately bear the brunt of the results of her cowardice.
I'd like people to see my competence in governing contrast with their chaos.
Do you follow this rule? Do you adhere to it?
I have already said that I will not use multi-stall women's restrooms in the Capitol.
So let's get into all that and explain why the first major trans politicians in both the UK and the US suck absolute ass, and why that's the case. Especially when so many organisations and activist groups fighting to make the world a better place are filled to the brim with trans people, progressive trans people. So how is it that the trans people who after decades of heartache finally get a chance to represent us as a community are so disappointing, so conservative, and so unrepresentative of the trans community as a whole and our politics?
Mr. Speaker, the whole House will have read the statement today from my honourable friend, the member for Bridgend. And I know that the House stands with you and will give you the support that you need to live freely as yourself.
But who am I to be going over this transatlantic trans disaster? Well, thank you for asking me. I am, of course, British Empire, and I put the C, the U, the N, and the T in columnist. Yeah, all those letters are in columnist. I stand by that. I am your host for this here YouTube show, and in my position as science and culture correspondent for the pre-Columbian newspaper The Daily Telegraph, I am here to give you the lowdown on who the groundbreaking trans politicians on both sides of the pond are, the ways in which they may want to throw up blood, and why our representatives disappointing us has been a constant for those of us desperate for people to fight for our dignity and rights since the Daily Telegraph was written on vellum. Back then, Dan here had to illustrate all the marginalia, and let me tell you, there are only so many times you can watch this husk of a man draw the most horny cockatrice you've ever seen, next to articles about the Black Death, before you start longing for a touch of the bubonic plague yourself. Centuries later, it's me who's torturing Dan, by making him learn who Sarah McBride and Jamie Wallace are, which is going to be the most painful ordeal that he's been through on a personal level since he lost the top layer of his skin in the Great Fire of London. Despite what some transphobes might have you believe, it's not necessary that trans politicians will suck. That's not some innate quality of trans people. Most of us have good politics, or at least not awful politics, or inconsistent politics. As a demographic, we tend to be, as my generation would say, based. To get to a high level in politics, however, you have to, at least to some extent, buy into the belief that the system you're being elected to can enact change. That doesn't necessarily mean you endorse it. We have a fair few MPs in the House of Commons that are active socialists, for instance, although they are few and far between, and most of those even have been incredibly quiet since Keir Starmer started firing at anyone to the left of Margaret Thatcher. You are, however, more likely to aspire to become a politician if you see political office as an avenue for change. Or, and this might be more likely the case in one of our subjects today, personal ambition and prestige. This latter type only has principles so far as they get them the job and keep them in power. The former would ideally bristle against attempts to suppress their principles, fight for the causes that made them want to fight in the first place, and I say ideally because once upon a time I thought that Sarah McBride was one of these people, and before she graduated from state-level politics to federal politics, she acted very much like someone with principles. Someone who got into politics to improve the lives of the trans community and people in general. It appears, however, that some of those principles got lost somewhere on the flight between Delaware and DC. So let me elaborate. Sarah McBride is, apart from her transgender identity, a pretty typical example of an establishment Democrat. She worked as a campaign staffer for Beau Biden, for Christ's sake. That Beau Biden. And Delaware Governor Jack Markle in 2010 and 2008 respectively. And this wasn't just a passing job either. She is a friend of the Biden family. After she came out as transgender, Beau Biden called her personally, telling her, "Sarah, I just wanted you to know, I'm so proud of you. I love you, and you're still a part of the Biden family." Joe Biden himself made statements saying that he was happy for her and proud of her, which is nice, until you remember that it's Joe Biden, the 94 crime bill guy, and Benjamin Netanyahu's sugar daddy saying this. In fact, Joe Biden even wrote the foreword to this book, Sarah McBride's memoir, Tomorrow Will Be Different, Love, Loss, and the Fight for Trans Equality, published in 2018, detailing her political career, her LGBT rights activism, and the story of the love of her life, queer activist Andrew Cray, who died from oral cancer 4 days after their wedding. It's hard not to feel for Sarah McBride, even beyond her tragic personal life. Dealing with being a trans person in the public eye, she has done important work. She was the National Press Secretary of the Human Rights Campaign, and worked hard as an elected representative in Delaware to ban discrimination against trans people. And despite her actions in recent weeks, she was active in speaking out against anti-trans bathroom bills in North Carolina back in 2016. From Global News almost a decade ago, a transgender woman posted a photo of herself in a North Carolina bathroom in a powerful statement against a state law that limits public bathroom access for transgender people and is seen as anti-LGBT. Sarah McBride, 25, is a trans rights activist who works as a communications manager for LGBT Progress at American Progress. Last Thursday, she was in Mecklenburg County, NC, when she took a photograph of herself in a bathroom to challenge House Bill 2, or the Bathroom Bill, legislation that overturned local laws that would have expanded protections for the LGBT community. Here I am using a women's bathroom in North Carolina that I'm technically barred from being in. They say I'm a pervert. They say I'm a man dressed as a woman. They say I'm a threat to their children. They say I'm confused. They say I'm dangerous. And they say accepting me as the person I have fought my life to be seen as reflects the downfall of a once great nation. I'm just a person. We are all just people, trying to pee in peace. A strong statement from McBride there, and sorely needed, especially from one of the few trans people with the power to change laws to make the world a safer place for her and people like her. But now, when she has much more power than she did back then, having gone from state to national politics, becoming the first openly transgender person to be elected into the United States Congress, this same issue was raised, targeted in her direction specifically, targeting her by name. And instead of fighting, instead of standing her ground and ensuring the Capitol will be a place free from active discrimination against its trans staff, visitors, and politicians, she rolled over and showed her yellow belly. House Speaker Mike Johnson declared Wednesday that lawmakers and staff will have to use the restroom corresponding with their biological sex, a statement directed at Sarah McBride, the first transgender person to be elected to Congress, months before she is set to arrive on Capitol Hill. All single-sex facilities in the Capitol and House office buildings, such as restrooms, changing rooms, and locker rooms, are reserved for individuals of that biological sex, the Louisiana Republican said. Women deserve women's only spaces. The statement comes a day after Johnson was questioned on the issue and emphasised the need to treat all persons with dignity and respect. He also acknowledged that this is an issue the Congress has never had to address before, and we're going to do that in a deliberate fashion with member consensus on it. A resolution to restrict McBride's access to women's restrooms was introduced Monday by GOP Rep Nancy Mace of South Carolina, who pledged to fight to keep men out of women's spaces. Mace said the bill was aimed specifically at McBride, who is elected to the House this month from Delaware. I'm not here to fight about bathrooms. I'm here to fight for Delawareans and to bring down costs facing families, the incoming member said. She added, like all members, I will follow the rules outlined by Speaker Johnson, even if I disagree with them. Needless to say, Sarah McBride would have just given up and gone into the police car at Stonewall rather than fight back.
And those are issues where you can find common ground with Republicans. And I look forward to building relationships and building trust and respect with colleagues on the other side of the aisle. But we can't give up on our capacity to find durable bipartisan solutions for this country.
In 2016, Michelle Obama, wife of two-term United States President Barack Obama, coined a phrase that has done irreparable damage to the attitudes of Democrats to the increasingly rabid and cruel attacks on minorities put forward by the Republican Party. At the Democratic National Convention, she told the assembled crowd, which had gathered to support Hillary Clinton's campaign for president, how to handle bullies like Donald Trump and the post-Obama Republican Party.
That when someone is cruel or acts like a bully, you don't stoop to their level. No, our motto is, when they go low, we go high.
When they go low, we go high. This is a recipe for letting the most repugnant clowns in the Republican Party walk all over you. And you don't want them to do that, because clown shoes are massive. By rolling over for the Republicans here, you don't come out looking like the bigger person. You come out looking like someone who stands for nothing. It's not just Sarah McBride that will be affected by a bathroom ban in the Capitol, though she is certainly the person the Republicans are targeting with this measure. But visitors, staff members all over the building, and future generations of trans legislators and staff who Sarah McBride presumably is hoping she pays the way for will suffer because Sarah McBride took Michelle Obama's words to heart. Don't stand up for yourself. Don't stand up for your community. Every rule must be followed, no matter how cruel, and no matter how much it's designed to hurt you or your community. When they go low, we go high. Except, fuck that. This is not what people voted in Sarah McBride to do. She was actively and publicly against bathroom bans prior to taking office. Now she doesn't want to stir the pot. She'll sit back and let Republicans use her presence as an excuse to attack the trans community, thinking she's giving off dignity and courage by just taking it. Instead, she's leaving the rest of us to rot because she doesn't want to cause trouble for the Democrats by her existence being awkward. Fuck that. This is a measure that needs to be fought. You don't get dignity by letting people walk all over you as a trans person, hell, as a person. You have to fight for your dignity, and for that of your community, and for those that will come after you. And it goes beyond even this awful saga, Because apparently, Sarah McBride personally had a hand in the Kamala Harris campaign's silence on trans issues during the campaign, which made trans people feel like Democrats were throwing us under the bus. And also, because Republicans wouldn't shut the fuck up about us for even 2 seconds, let the Trump campaign's intense smears against us set the narrative. They had no counter to the awful transphobic messaging, because they didn't want to talk about it. McBride had a hand in that. And now she's in office, she lacks even the political will to keep herself from using the men's bathroom. From being forced to use the wrong bathroom. I mean, I don't expect Democrats to have principles at this point. I mean, it would be nice, but come on. I expect them to be at least self-interested. Having no spine in a fight targeted at you, specifically you as a person, is a new level of uselessness, even for the Democrats. And this comes at a time of increased attacks on trans people throughout the country. A time when trans people desperately need a voice to fight for us. Someone to speak up to the pain the community are feeling and have our voice be heard. To counter the wave of hate coming from the side that will now control all branches of government. From ABC News. In Odessa, the passage of a city ordinance amendment in October declares that any person who uses a bathroom, changing room, or locker room at any city building, including community centres, libraries, airports, park facilities, and administrative office buildings, that does not align with their gender or assigned at birth, could be convicted of a Class C misdemeanour and punished with a fine of up to $500. People who violate the rule and refuse to leave a public bathroom could also be sued for statutory damages, in an account of not less than $10,000 for each violation of this ordinance. According to the decree. The ordinance lists exceptions for children or someone offering emergency assistance. For transgender and non-binary Odessa residents who have lived under this rule, the recent decision from House Speaker Mike Johnson to reserve congressional bathrooms based on one's gender assigned at birth comes as no surprise. His mandate comes as Representative-elect Sarah McBride, the first openly transgender member of Congress, gets ready to begin serving her constituents. Diego Miguel Sanchez, who in 2008 became the first openly transgender senior congressional staff member, told ABC News that he remembers being welcomed by Congress members, who assured him that they intended to make sure you're as safe as absolutely everyone else, that we want to make sure that no one bothers you while you're here. It didn't shock me, but it was a kind of welcome I wasn't expecting, Sanchez said. There are people all over the place at Capitol Hill who do welcome us, and they are still there, because I see them when I visit every couple of weeks. Sanchez works as the senior policy advisor to Congresswoman Barney Frank, until Frank's 2013 retirement. He was disheartened hearing that McBride was specifically being targeted in the effort to restrict bathrooms. For the community to have moved to a place of public acceptance and then being shut down in a way as if it were criminalized, as if we are criminals, it is absolutely unacceptable, said Sanchez. Disappointing isn't a strong enough word. McBride's abdication of her responsibility to fight for her constituents, for her community, is going to hurt people like Sanchez. People who don't have the opportunity to make their voices heard directly and in the public ear. People that need people to go low when Republicans go low. Not to appease them and go through public ritual humiliation, to show that the rules the US government puts down are sacred and must be obeyed, no matter how cruel, no matter how obscene. Even beyond the lack of backbone, the willingness to throw the community under the bus to save the Democratic Party the bother of defending trans people, besides the being close with the Bidens despite them being, well, the Bidens, and abandoning all principles at the door once he had a taste of power from the looks of things, unless she's going to change tack massively in office, it's abandoning his zeal for trans rights, universal healthcare, and other genuinely progressive issues. Well, Sarah McBride is consistent on one issue. President Biden is right to reinforce a collective commitment to support Israel's self-defense, which today has resulted in nearly every missile being intercepted and countless lives saved. On October 7th of this year, she tweeted, "We cannot waver in our efforts to bring the hostages home, including 7 American hostages that remain in brutal captivity by Hamas. May the memories of the victims be a blessing for all those who knew them and a reminder of the urgent need for lasting peace and security." In an interview with Jewish Insider from August 2023, McBride emphasized that federal law already contains protections to ensure that the US aid shouldn't be used in ways that contradict our values, and voiced serious concerns about any policy that would single out Israel and treat it differently than other countries we support through foreign aid or hold it to a different standard. She went on to espouse support for the 2016 Memorandum of Understanding for US military aid to Israel, a document that included an $8 billion increase in aid. During the Delaware debate with Congress, McBride said, "There is a global struggle between authoritarianism and democracy that's happening right now." This was in reference to Ukraine and included the US, but seemingly did not include Netanyahu's leadership in Israel. Instead, she has said to her support of Israel, with only vague qualifiers about wanting peace. So, Sarah McBride being close with the Bidens is making a little more sense now. The rainbow imperialism of the Democratic Party that the Joe Biden regime symbolized for many is alive and well in Sarah McBride, as well as other queer Democrats like Pete Buttigieg, who are only part of the community until the party demands otherwise, until it demands they tone themselves down, or stay quiet to save the Democratic Party an awkward conversation. And by that I mean having to actually stand up for their voter base. Like every minority group, we will be represented in the halls of power by someone whose position is only a victory insofar as it establishes that people like us can too be war criminals. But at least Sarah McBride has a history of fighting for human rights, even if it's unclear whether she will be abandoning her principles at the door to the Capitol as recent weeks suggest. Unlike her, the first trans member of Parliament in Britain has pretty much no redeeming features, not the least in his past.
I know that the House stands with you and will give you the support that you need to live freely as yourself.
Can I start by joining the Prime Minister in his remarks in relation to the honourable member for Bridgend?
And it's good to see the member for Bridgend in the chamber this afternoon. I commend him for his statement earlier today.
That was a change in approach, at least from Boris Johnson, who made a joke about gender at a dinner for Conservative MPs last night.
Jamie Wallace was the MP for Bridgend in Wales from 2019 to 2024, a one-term MP from the cohort of Tories elected under the Boris Johnson landslide after the years of smear campaigns against the absolute goat, Jeremy Corbyn, who'd worked their magic, and led people to believe that an old peace activist in his mid-70s with a jam obsession was going to personally murder every person in Israel and magically transform into Joseph Stalin or something. If you've heard of Jamie Wallace, it's probably only because he's the first openly trans MP in British parliamentary history. Because apart from that fact, Jamie Wallace's public history, like a lot of Tory MPs, is a long list of scandals. I mean, this was the Boris Johnson cohort of Tory MPs, so that shouldn't be shocking. In fact, the only reason Jamie Wallace ended up coming out as trans is because he was at the receiving end of some dodgy shit. Put bluntly, he was blackmailed into coming out. And had that not happened, this fact about him would have been buried with his political career, which he'd planned to spend entirely in the closet. According to The Guardian back in 2022, Jamie Wallace has become the first MP to come out as trans, revealing he was diagnosed with gender dysphoria from a young age but wanted to show how important it is to be yourself. In a statement posted hours after Boris Johnson reportedly joked about people who are transgender, the Bridgend MP said he had never lived my truth, but would try to start by telling everyone about his identity. I had no intention of ever sharing this with you, Wallace wrote in a post on his website published early on Wednesday morning. I always imagined I would leave politics well before I ever said this out loud. Wallace, who said he would continue to use he/him pronouns, said there had been a close call where his trans identity had nearly been made public in April 2020 by a blackmailer who sent photographs to family members. The blackmailer demanded £50,000 to keep quiet, Wallace said. But after the police got involved, the perpetrator pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 2 years and 9 months in prison. For a while, it seemed as though I would be able to get on with things and move on, Wallace wrote. Being an MP and hiding something like this was always going to be tough, but I arrogantly assumed I was up for it. Well, I'm not. Following this statement, Wallace opened up about being a survivor, and weirdly talked about the support he received for coming out from the Tories, even following Boris Johnson's comments and the Johnson government's consistent campaign against trans people, a term in office that brought the UK the Cass Review, repeated jabs against trans people, including in front of the mother of Britannia Jai, but also, weirdly, Boris Johnson praising Wallace's courage. For some reason, the Tories, and apparently not even Wallace, had a problem with taking a moment to talk about how brave their trans MP was, while simultaneously trying and succeeding to make Britain a more dangerous and stifling place for trans people to live in. And it's safe to say that Wallace had overall very little impact. He didn't transition in office and kept using he/him pronouns the entire time, which is fine, but it does mean he basically stayed in the background and didn't make waves, when he had the opportunity to make a statement with his actions. He did oppose Liz Truss for her transphobic policies post-coming out, and was openly supportive of Penny Mordaunt, the least transphobic candidate for Tory leadership since 2019. But he basically remained a quiet backbencher. Technically, Britain's first trans MP, but in practice, a no-name, scandal-ridden Tory who wore a British flag mask and disappeared quietly into irrelevance following the 2024 general election. He did not fight for the community, at least not in the public eye, except for speaking out against the government's intention to exclude trans people from a proposed conversion therapy ban, which was good and necessary, but for the most part he stayed quiet and took his salary. The news of his intention to step down as MP, not even mentioning his trans identity, in the headline in the Sunday Times. Jamie Wallace, Tory MP who fled car crash scene to step down at election. A headline which makes it sound like he crashed a car in order to step down, which, I mean, if that was necessary, it would make leaving office feel like a bad Fast and the Furious sequel, which I'm all down for. Aside from fleeing a crash scene and coming out following blackmail threats, Jamie Wallace made headlines of being the director of several dodgy firms that violated trading standards, such as Quickie Divorce Limited and SugarDaddy.net. For the crime of merely violating the law to run a bunch of incredibly normal businesses, famous arsehole Jess Phillips MP demanded he lose the whip. I suppose this is why they say don't mix business with pleasure. So, why does this keep happening? Why do the first major trans politicians in both the US and the UK end up so disappointing? It's hard to get into national level politics. It's hard to get into political office in general, but to get to the point where you become a representative for a whole ass country, you have to go through a lot of shit. Background checks for one, battles against you from lobbyists if you're running a primary in America for another. If you're not down with whatever horrible shit Netanyahu has been doing when you're running, you're going to have a whole lot of AIPAC money thrown behind anyone running against you. And that's before we get to the Democratic establishment in general, throwing its considerable weight in terms of money, advertising, and influence into making sure that it is as difficult as possible for someone to get into higher office if they don't tread the party line. Though that's still an easier line to cross in the US, because primaries exist. In the UK, we don't even have that. The party has to select you for a seat. Granted, in the Labour Party, we used to select the Labour candidate for a seat through a democratic process, but then Keir Starmer came in and decided the people of the UK couldn't be trusted with democracy, especially members of his own party. As such, it's incredibly difficult for candidates considered controversial, even due to something they can't help, such as being trans, to get through all the gatekeeping to even become a candidate, never mind be voted in, with the extra hurdle of overcoming an inevitable transphobic smear campaign from your opponent and overcoming prejudices from within those populations you need to vote for you enough to get them to vote you in. Given the state of the major parties in the UK, it's unthinkable that Kemi Badenoch, for example, a rabid transphobe, would allow for a trans candidate to run to be an MP for her party. Keir Starmer would, I imagine, be a little bit more okay with it than Kemi not afraid of Doctor Who Badenoch, given that Eddie Izzard almost got there last time. But this would only be as long as our imaginary trans candidate licked his boots and said they do Thatcherism but with a sad face, which is his whole shtick, and the candidate would have to be okay with Wes Street and constantly trying to throw us all off a cliff. Jamie Wallace got into office before coming out, and even then only came out because he was blackmailed into it. Even then, he came out in the midst of a scandal about the open transphobia of his party, so it wasn't exactly a happy announcement even with the blackmail aside. And Sarah McBride, well, it's not surprising that the first trans member of Congress is firmly in bed with the Democratic establishment. Someone close with the Biden family, someone who interned at the White House, someone who, when the Democratic establishment is itching to throw trans people under the bus, rather than just accept that they ran a dogshit campaign, sides with the establishment and lies down in front of said bus, rather than standing up not just for what is right, but for what would personally be good for her as an individual. For a trans person to reach such an office, well, it's a lot easier if you put the interests of the party before your community, and even yourself. But that isn't the type of politician that we need. As trans people, as people in general, who wants a politician that is so careful about not rocking the boat so as to maintain their shaky position as a trans figure in a transphobic establishment that they refuse to fight for the basic rights and dignities of their own people, or even just themselves? No one wants trans people in government so that they can point and look and say, look, there's a trans person in government. The plus side about having trans people in government is that they understand the issues trans people face and can communicate those and fight for them to improve on a platform the rest of us will never reach. I would much rather have a cis person who understands us and fights for us than a trans person who's just going to do fucking nothing. What is the point of having a trans voice at the highest echelons of power if they ignore trans issues, if they sweep our concerns under the rug, if they'd rather humiliate themselves in public than dare stand up for our community? Especially at this point in time, when both of our countries have decided trans rights are a no-go, when we need voices standing up for us more than ever, and when more and more people, even those that are supposed to be our allies, are itching to throw us under the bus or give concessions to those who hate us. I would much rather have material progress than some nobody who won't do anything having a seat at the table. I can only hope that Sarah McBride finds her spine before she starts her position and is faced with a Trump quadrifecta fighting her every move. As for Jamie Wallace, I hope he can transition, given he was an MP for a party that's made that harder and harder and is promising to make it harder still. I hope that maybe, despite how things are going, and despite what some of the people that may have given us hope in the past turn out to be, that tomorrow will be different. Until then, thanks for watching. You know, it's a banger title, but it's got Joe Biden in it, so really, who is to say whether it's good or bad? Hey everyone, thank you for watching this video all the way to the end. When you're watching this, it'll either be incredibly late November or it'll be December, and I will be in trouble financially, as I always am. But if you want to give me a Christmas bonus, I would really, really like that. Yeah, things are interesting in December, and by interesting I mean that very few people watch YouTube. So hopefully this does well, but I'm not expecting it to. Either way, I had a good time writing it. And by a good time, I mean... well, I mean a good time, despite the fact that the world is fucked. And I'm really struggling to stay optimistic the last few weeks, as I'm assuming some of you. I'm still going to try to do it. My brand is supposed to be like, I don't know, I do some more positivity at the end, despite everything. But sometimes that's difficult, and the last few weeks that is incredibly difficult. Okay, so aside from that, I'll stop going off script now. If you want to help, you can give me one-time donations on Coffee or PayPal, links below as always, or sign up to my Patreon or YouTube memberships. We can get early videos, access to the members-only Discord, my Nintendo Switch friend code, and exclusive content, such as like interviews and stuff. And you'll get your name read out at the end of each video if you do that, just like these lovely people who are the best. Quesadilla de Tortilla Azul. Leron, Adam Lees, Danielle Nevels, No Not That Paul, MB, Madeline Aguirre, Ben Murphy, Lex Phoenix, Ender Cresits, Janelle Miradeeb, Jade Senior, Boa Ear, James W, Marv and Orr, Tamsin, Bob the Builder 5445554, Deborah Laboon, Vegish, Zilzathenium, Vince Whitaker, Amelia Unchained, Sarah, Jason Haig, Frank McManus, Susan Foster, Helena Real, Sierra Whiskey, Orestria, Ali Catgill, John N, Scully Lloyd Luciente, Jason Cribbett, Shield Vaden, Robin Podolsky, Turtle Choom, Casual Observer, Manta Ray, Courtney Burnett, Sleepy Slug, Philippa DeBrogger, Soma Piglet, Brain Douche, Artie Wolf, Greg Noble, Deanna McMillan, Caroline Regalado, Alexandra Lilly, Harold Lott, Nerony Scarjan, and Joey Cobalt. Thank you so much, and Merry... when will this come out? Merry Thanksgiving? That's not what people say. I don't know. I'm not American. I don't know what you guys do for Thanksgiving. There's a turkey. I mean, I've had it like twice, because I live with a couple of Americans. I've been friends with them, but, you know, I don't know, it seems kind of in bad taste. I mean, I'm British. I'm from the country where on November 5th they burn the effigy of a Catholic on a fire, so I can't really fucking talk. Okay, bye.